Next, he shouted the customs agent, gesturing impatiently for Diego to approach the counter. Miami International Airport boiled with the typical movement of a Friday afternoon, but all that agitation seemed to pause when Agent Thompson's eyes landed on the 24-year-old. Diego Morales firmly held his beaten backpack and the Brazilian passport, his slightly trembling hands after 11 hours of flight. It came to the United States for the first time, carrying nothing but a dream of studying aeronautical engineering in one of the best universities in the country, and a letter of recommendation that kept as its most precious good. "Where do you come from?" asked Thompson, already flipping through the passport with poor disguised contempt. Behind him, 3 other agents interrupted his activities, clearly interested in what was to come. The name Thompson was stamped on his identifying plate, along with a small American flag that he proudly played whenever he wanted to intimidate someone. "Brazil, sir. I'm a student. I have full scholarship at the University of Miami," Diego replied, paused but correctly, carefully extending all the documents organized in a transparent folder. Years of night study after long working hours had made their English almost perfect. Thompson didn't even look at the papers. "Of course you have. You all have a well-rehearsed story." He made quotes in the air, causing muffled giggles of his colleagues. "Let's take a look at this luggage." All the luggage. The line behind Diego was growing rapidly, and whispers of impatience began to emerge. Some passengers looked with pity, others with irritation, but all witnessed that deliberate public humiliation that Thompson seemed to taste like an expensive wine. "Sir, can I know the specific reason for the magazine?" Diego asked, keeping his voice calm as he discharged his few clothes on the cold metal table. Each piece was impeccably clean and folded, a reflection of a rigid education that valued dignity even in simplicity. "The reason?" Thompson smiled cruelly, lowering his voice so that only Diego could hear. "The reason is that I decide who enters my country, and boys like you." He stopped purposely, letting prejudice ride in the air like toxic smoke. "You always have something to hide." Diego took a deep breath, and something in his eyes changed. A strange serenity, as if that situation had woken up an inner force that had been cultivated for a long time. He had faced prejudice before, but never with such high consequences at stake. "Are you sure you want to continue this procedure, Agent Thompson?" Diego asked, pronouncing the name with precision that made the employee frown. There was something in the way the young Brazilian said he sounded almost like a warning. "Because once we start, there really is no return." Thompson hesitated for a second. Something in Diego's tone had changed completely, but his arrogance spoke louder. "Are you threatening me, boy?" "By no means," Diego said, but his smile now carried a secret that made some of the agents around him to exchange uncomfortable looks. "I just want to make sure you are prepared for the consequences of your own actions." What Thompson didn't know is that Diego had spent the last 6 months to be meticulously preparing for any prejudice situation he could face. Each document was perfectly organized, every detail of its carefully documented story, and its patience had been forged for years of overcoming that no arrogant bureaucrat could imagine. There, in the face of dozens of curious looks, and the excessive arrogance of those who abuse power, Diego kept a calm that only exists in those who carry secrets that can turn upside-down games upside down. His right hand rested casually over the jacket pocket, where something very special awaited the right time to reveal. If you are enjoying this story of how a simple immigrant has turned a humiliation into something that left a whole airport standing applauding, do not forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened then changed not only Diego's day, but the career of many people who underestimated the young Brazilian. Thompson continued to review Diego's luggage with almost theatrical cruelty, throwing each item on the table as if they were evidence of some imaginary crime. Her folded social shirt became a mess, her only social shoes were untied and overturned, and her engineering books were gapsing page by page with evident contempt. "Books in English?" Thompson raised a copy of Fluid Mechanics, pretending to surprise. "Impressive. You really read this, or are you just carrying to impress?" The other agents laughed like well-trained hyenas, feeding the inflated ego of the colleague. Diego kept the silence, but his eyes accompanied each movement. Years working in a metallurgical in the interior of Brazil had taught him that insecure men always need to decrease others to feel large, and Thompson was revealing himself deeply insecure. "I found something interesting," announced Thompson, holding a sealed envelope. "Uncreased correspondence, this can be smuggling." He tore the envelope deliberately, ignoring Diego's educated protests. Inside was a letter handwritten on simple paper, with careful handwriting from someone who clearly fought with English. Thompson started reading aloud, exaggerating the accent. "My dear son, we are very proud of you getting the bag. Your mother cries for joy every day. This is a private correspondence, Diego interrupted, his voice still controlled but with a firmness that made Thompson pause for a moment. Private? Thompson laughed loudly. Nothing is private when you enter my country, boy, especially when you come from a place where, he gestured vaguely, letting prejudice speak for you. The line behind Diego had grown considerably, and the murmurs of impatience became audible comments. An elderly lady whispered to her husband, "What a shame, the boy did nothing wrong." An executive checked the annoyed clock, clearly late for some important commitment. Thompson noticed the growing concern, but instead of accelerating the process, decided to intensify the show. "You know how it is," said loud enough for the crowd to hear. "We have to be careful with whom we let in, especially when they come from countries with problems." That's when Diego did something unexpected. Instead of defending or protesting, he smiled. A genuine smile, almost grateful. "Thank you, Agent Thompson. How it is. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to see exactly who you really are," Diego answered calmly, taking his cell phone out of his pocket. "Can I call my university? Just to warn you that I will be delayed because of a routine procedure." Something in the way Diego pronounced routine procedure made Thompson frown. There was a confidence there that did not match the situation, as if the young Brazilian knew something that Thompson didn't know. "You can save this phone. You won't call anyone until I finish here." "Of course," Diego put the device, but not before pressing some buttons quickly. "No problem. I have all the time in the world." What Thompson couldn't see is that Diego had just activated the cell phone's audio recording. Every word of prejudice, every gesture of abuse of authority, every moment of that public humiliation was being documented with the crystal quality of a modern iPhone. Diego had grown listening to stories of immigrants who suffered abuse at airports, and as a 24-year-old from the digital generation, knew exactly the power of evidence. Its apparent passivity was actually a carefully calculated strategy. "You know," Thompson continued, now turning the passport pages with contempt, "I see many like you, all with their sad stories, all thinking they deserve a chance in the most powerful country in the world." He approached Diego's face. "But between you and me, boy, disappear, you know your place." Diego nodded politely, as if he completely agreed. "It's absolutely right, Mr. Thompson. Each one has his place." He stopped and looked straight into the agent's eyes. "The question is, are you sure you know yours?" For a second, Thompson hesitated. There was something in Diego's calm that made no sense. It was as if the young man was following a script that Thompson had not read, playing a game whose rules he only knew. What the arrogant agent did not know is that every second of that humiliation was sealing his own destiny, and that Diego carried much more than dreams and books in that seemingly simple luggage. While Thompson continued his display of cruelty, Diego silently watched every detail. The agent's badge number, the names of colleagues laughing at the jokes, the exact time of each prejudiced comment. His engineer mind was systematically cataloging everything he would need later. "Do you know what pisses me off in you?" Thompson held Diego's mother's letter like garbage. "You come here thinking that you deserve the same opportunities as real Americans." He deliberately tore one of the tips of the letter just to see the reaction. Diego took a deep breath, but it was not pain that crossed his face. It was something that seemed almost gratitude. "Interesting perspective, Agent Thompson. Can I ask how long he has been working here?" 15 years protecting this country from people like you," replied Thompson proudly. "Why?" "Professional curiosity." Diego smiled strangely. "You must know the regulations well then." Thompson hesitated. Something in Diego's tranquility was starting to bother him, but his arrogance did not allow him to stop now. "Of course I know. I'm senior supervisor of this section." What Thompson didn't know was that Diego had spent 3 months studying all the regulations of the American customs. As the son of a labor lawyer who always taught that knowledge is power, he knew exactly which rights were being violated at that time. In line, the tension was growing exponentially. A man of suit whispered to his wife, "This is absurd. The boy did nothing." A woman began to record discreetly with her cell phone, clearly uncomfortable with what she witnessed. An executive cheered the annoyed clock and muttered, 15 minutes at this. What clowning." Thompson noticed the murmurs and decided to accelerate his humiliation. "Do you know what I'm going to do? I'll call your university and tell them what kind of person they are getting." "Please do that," Diego answered immediately with a speed that surprised Thompson. "By the way, let me give the direct number." He recited a phone number from memory. Thompson diverted. He put on the lively to humiliate Diego publicly. "University of Miami Admissions Department, how can I help you?" "This is Agent Thompson, Miami Customs. I have here a Diego Morales who says he has full bag there. I would like to confirm if it is true." There was a break from the other end of the line. "Diego Morales, a moment please." Some keyboard clicks. "Sir, could you repeat your name and department?" "Agent Thompson, Customs of Miami Airport." I understand. Are you aware that Diego Morales is our most prominent international scholarship of the last 5 years? He has been personally recommended by the rector of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and has a letter of recommendation from Dr. James Richardson, which I imagine you know. Thompson's blood froze. Dr. James Richardson was one of the country's most respected aeronautical engineers, former NASA competitor. Well, by the way, he continued, his voice on the phone, we have been waiting for Diego for days. He has a meeting tomorrow with our academic council about his sustainable propulsion project. Is there any problems we should be aware? Thompson hung up quickly, his face starting to reddish. Diego kept the same serene expression, but now there was something different in his eyes, as if a complex gear had begun to spin. Problem with the call? Asked Diego politely. I can call myself if you prefer. I have the personal number of Dr. Martinez, program coordinator, or Dr. Richardson if you want to talk to him directly. It was then that Thompson made his fatal error. Instead of retreating, his injured arrogance made him double the bet. I don't care who you know, boy. Here I am, the boss. Diego nodded patiently and said something that made Thompson's blood freeze. Are you sure, Agent Thompson? Because in a few minutes, I believe your perspective on who really rules here will change dramatically. In the crowd behind them, someone started to applaud slowly. 1 palm, 2 palms. Soon other people came together, creating a sound that echoed through the terminal as the distant snoring of a storm that was just beginning. Thompson looked around, confused and growing nervous. His colleagues began to move discreetly away, realizing that something was very wrong. Agent Martinez whispered, Thompson, maybe it is better. Shut up, Martinez! Thompson exploded. I solve it my way! Diego smiled gently and said, by the way, Agent Thompson, do you know Federal Regulation 19 CFR 162.6 on magazine procedures? I'm sure a senior supervisor like you are familiar with penalties for abuse of documented video authority. Thompson looked around and for the first time noticed that at least 5 people were recording with their cell phones. Her legs were bombas. And you should also know the 1983 Civil Code section on civil rights violation under government authority. Diego continued calmly. Fines can reach $250,000 apart from the immediate loss of employment. What happened in Thompson's eyes at that moment was like watching the fall of an entire empire, because Diego had just revealed that everything, absolutely everything, was being recorded, that he knew not only his rights, but also the exact legal consequences of every prejudiced word that had come out of the agent's mouth in the last 20 minutes. But what Thompson didn't know yet is that the real bomb was about to explode, and that this apparently defenseless young Brazilian carried a lot more than books and dreams in that beaten backpack. Diego slowly took his cell phone out of his pocket and showed the screen to Thompson. The recording was running exactly 23 minutes ago. Thanks for making this so easy, Agent Thompson. Every word of yours was recorded in high definition. Thompson's blood completely froze. Around him, his colleagues began to move away as if he were radioactive. Martinez whispered, Thompson, you're screwed. But wait, there's more. Diego continued with a scary calm. He opened his backpack and withdrew an organized folder. Remember when you asked if I knew my place? Well, let me show you exactly my place. Diego withdrew the first document. Dr. James Richardson's letter of personal recommendation, former NASA technical director. He met me when I introduced my sustainable propulsion project at the International Miami Conference 6 months ago. Thompson tried to interrupt, but Diego raised his hand politely. Please, haven't finished yet? He showed the second document. 4 languages fluency certificate, including English level C2, higher than 90% of Native Americans. The crowd that had formed began to murmur approval. A lady applauded discreetly. Diego smiled and continued his methodical presentation. And here, he raised a thicker folder. We have 3 years of correspondence with the U.S. State Department on my academic exchange program, including this letter. He unfolded an official roll from the Deputy Secretary of Education himself, congratulating the Brazilian government for the brilliant scientific contribution that I would represent for American universities. Thompson was visibly sweating. His hands trembled as he tried to process the magnitude of the mistake he had made. Look, boy, we may have started with the wrong foot. Oh, I didn't finish. Diego interrupted gently. Do you know what's the best part? My father is João Morales. The name echoed through the terminal like thunder. Several people whispered recognition. Thompson frowned, clearly not knowing who it was but realizing the reaction of the crowd that had stepped on very dangerous ground. Don't you know? Diego seemed genuinely surprised. João Morales, Brazilian ambassador in the United States, that man there. He pointed to an elegant man who was quickly walking toward them, accompanied by 2 security guards and a tender woman who was clearly a government authority. Thompson almost passed out. The Brazilian ambassador was coming towards him, and Diego held evidence of 23 minutes of abuse of authority, racial discrimination, and violation of diplomatic protocol. My son, the ambassador arrived with a smile that didn't come to the eye. Forgive the delay. He was at a meeting with the Secretary of Internal Security. He looked at Thompson with the cold contempt of those who are used to dealing with incompetence. I hope you have received you properly. The woman in a suit approached. I'm Sarah Chen, Regional Director of Customs. Mr. Thompson, I need to talk to you immediately. Thompson tried to speak, but Diego raised his cell phone again. Maybe you want to hear this first. He squeezed play. Thompson's voice echoed loudly and clearly. The reason is that I decide who enters my country, and boys like you always have something to hide. You all have your sad stories. Some you know your place. The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly someone began to applaud. Soon the whole crowd was standing, applauding Diego, not only for his dignity, but by masterful form as he had documented and exposed institutional prejudice. Sarah Chen was visibly furious, her Thompson-fixed eyes as if calculating how many zeros would have the lawsuits that were coming. Mr. Thompson is suspended immediately. Security, please follow him out of the premises. Thompson tried to protest, but his voice came out like a defeated whisper. I was just doing my job. His work, said Diego calmly, keeping his documents, was to check if I had a legal right to enter the country, not to humiliate a citizen who has all the necessary visas and contributes to the American scientific development. But Diego was not over yet. He withdrew a last document from the folder. And this is the icing on the cake. And it was a copy of an internal customs email, dated 3 weeks ago, alerting all agents about new treatment guidelines to international visitors, especially academics and diplomats. Interestingly, Diego continued, this memorandum was sent after several formal embassies' complaints about the inadequate treatment of its citizens. He was signed by Director Chen. Sarah Chen read the document and his expression went from anger to absolute fury. Thompson, you not only ignored direct guidelines but created an international diplomatic incident. While Thompson was escorted out, Diego turned to the crowd that applauded. He had transformed what should be his greatest humiliation. At the moment he would define not only his own dignity, but would also change the treatment protocols to immigrants at that airport forever. But when everyone thought the story was over, Diego did something no one expected, and that he would transform that moment of personal justice into something much bigger, proving that true revenge is not just about defeating the enemy, but to use this victory to build bridges that benefit future generations. 3 months later, Diego was on the main stage of the International Aeronautical Engineering Conference, presenting his sustainable propulsion project for an audience of over 2,000 experts from around the world. His research had been accepted by NASA for preliminary tests, and 3 American universities disputed his academic partnership. Prejudice, Diego said to the microphone, his voice echoing through the crowded auditorium, usually reveals much more about whoever practices him than who suffers him. The audience applauded at length, many getting up on ovation. Meanwhile, Thompson lived a very different reality. Summingly fired from customs, he found that finding a new job in the security sector was impossible. The video of his humiliation had become viral, with over 5 million views and devastating comments about his behavior. His own wife asked for divorce after watching the recordings, saying that he did not recognize the man with whom he had married. I never imagined my husband could be so cruel, she said in an interview with the local newspaper. Seeing that young man maintaining dignity while Robert humiliated him made me realize who I had really chosen to share my life. Sarah Chen implemented a mandatory training program on diversity and intercultural respect for all customs agents. Diego's case has become a reference study on how institutional prejudice can be fought with preparation, knowledge, and unshakable dignity. Diego used the visibility of the case to create a non-profit organization that offers free legal advice to immigrants facing discrimination at airports. Turning pain into purpose, he explained in interviews, is the only way to ensure that others do not go through what I went through. The organization, Dignity Without Borders, had already helped more than 500 similar cases in just 6 months, with a success rate of 89% in court proceedings. Diego became a requested speaker, his presentations always crowded by young people who saw an example of how to face injustices with intelligence. Ambassador João Morales, proud of his son, told reporters, Diego always knew that education and preparation are the most powerful weapons against prejudice. He turned 23 minutes of humiliation into a lesson that will benefit thousands of people for generations. Thompson, in turn, had to move to another city after neighbors and former colleagues discovered their identity. His name has become synonymous with everything worst in abuse of authority, studied in professional ethics courses as an example of what to ever do. Living alone in a modest apartment in the interior of the country, Thompson watched Diego's achievements on television with a mix of repentance and envy. The young man he had tried to humiliate now was a White House guest for immigration policies discussions while he could barely pay the rent with sporadic work. The university where Diego studied created a scholarship on its name for young people from developing countries that show academic excellence and personal resilience. The Sustainable Propulsion project he developed promised to revolutionize commercial aviation, reducing carbon emissions by up to 40%. 6 months after the incident, Diego received an invitation to give a lecture at Miami Airport himself about dignity and respect in times of diversity. Ironically, it was held at the same terminal where it all began, but this time hundreds of people gathered to hear their words of wisdom and overcoming. The best revenge, Diego concluded his speech that day, is not to destroy who harms us, but to build something so significant that it makes injustice suffered irrelevant near the positive impact we have created. The auditorium got up in an ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Thompson watched the television lecture on his rented apartment, alone, unemployed, reflecting on how 23 minutes of arrogance had cost not only his job, but a reputation, marriage, and future. Diego had proved that true strength is not humiliating others, but in raising above the smallness of those who try to diminish us. A year later, Diego was invited to join the NASA Advisory Board for Diversity and Inclusion Affairs. Its history inspired the creation of stricter protocols at airports across the country, and its name became synonymous with dignity and overcoming. Diego's story has become a milestone on how preparation, dignity, and intelligence can turn any injustice into an opportunity for growth and social impact. Not only did he beat Thompson, he changed a whole system. Years later, when young immigrants face similar difficulties, they watch Diego's video and learn that the real victory is not to retaliate in the same coin, but to use their adversity as a fuel to achieve heights that prejudiced could never imagine. Thompson tried to humiliate Diego but ended up humiliating himself only. Diego has learned that true revenge is not to return the damage suffered, it is to achieve success that their enemies could never imagine, proving that the best response to prejudice is the triumph built with integrity, preparation, and a dignity that no injustice can break. If you have been inspired by this story of how Diego has transformed prejudice into purpose, subscribe to more stories that prove that when we face injustice with intelligence and dignity, we not only won our opponents, we create a legacy that transforms the world around us.